Have you ever been home alone, hearing footsteps when you're certain no one is there? Imagine hearing footsteps in a place where they shouldn't be. Footsteps from a floor that doesn't even exist. Tonight, we have a story that will make you rethink every shadow, every creak of your house, and what might be lurking in the corners. Ethan Weller had always been a man of routine. His life was simple, quiet, and peaceful. He had moved into his modest single-story home 3 years ago. The house, a small bungalow, sat on a quiet cul-de-sac, surrounded by overgrown hedges and towering trees. It was perfect for someone who didn't want to be bothered. Ethan had no family nearby, and he preferred it that way. Less noise, less distraction. His only companions were his books, his cat, and the silence of the evening. At least, that's how it had been until the night everything changed. It was a typical Tuesday night when Ethan first noticed the sound. He was lying on the couch, watching an old horror film on TV with a cup of tea in hand. The rain tapped lightly against the windows, and the only other sound was the occasional rattle of the wind. Then, in the middle of the movie, he heard something creak. At first, he thought it was just the house settling. It was old, after all, and houses often made noises. But then it came again, louder this time. Asterisk, creak, creak. The sound seemed to be coming from directly above him, and it was unmistakably the sound of footsteps. Ethan sat up, furrowing his brow. The thought that it might be an animal crossed his mind, but the house didn't have any attic or second floor. There was no way for anything to be walking above him. He told himself it was probably the pipes or the house adjusting to the temperature outside, but the steps didn't stop. Asterisk, creak, creak. It was as if someone was walking slowly across the floor above him, but there was no above to walk on. Ethan's heart began to race. He stood up, walked around the house, checking the ceiling for any signs of something unusual. The house was still, empty, untouched. He was alone. He shrugged it off as paranoia. He was just tired, right? But the footsteps continued throughout the night, growing louder and more persistent. It sounded like someone was walking up and down the hallway, pacing back and forth, never stopping. Each step, each creak, felt like it was growing closer. By the time midnight came, Ethan could no longer ignore the growing sense of dread that gnawed at him. He had to know what was going on. He couldn't just sit there and pretend that he hadn't heard what he had. So with trembling hands, he grabbed his phone and texted his best friend, Tyler. "Hey, I'm hearing something weird in the house. Footsteps upstairs." But there's no upstairs. Tyler, always the skeptic, replied with a simple, "You're just hearing things. I'll come over tomorrow." But the next night, when the footsteps returned, Ethan wasn't going to wait for Tyler. He called him again. "Tyler, I'm serious. Something is walking in the house. Please come over." Tyler agreed, though he was dubious. When he arrived, Ethan explained everything, and they decided to wait together, trying to catch whatever was making the noise. They sat in the living room, the only light coming from the TV, the rain outside growing heavier. For what seemed like hours, nothing happened. No footsteps, no creaks. "See," Tyler said, leaning back on the couch. "It's probably just your mind playing tricks." But just as Tyler finished speaking, the sound came again. Creak, creak, creak. It was so loud now that the whole house seemed to tremble with each step. Tyler shot to his feet. "There's no way," he whispered, his face pale. "We need to check this out." The two of them walked slowly down the hallway, every step measured, as the sound of footsteps echoed louder, pacing back and forth directly above them. But as they reached the end of the hall, the sound shifted. Instead of stopping at the ceiling, the footsteps continued down the hallway, toward them. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He felt a chill crawl up his spine. His heart pounded, and he froze. Tyler, now visibly shaken, motioned for Ethan to follow him into the living room. "Let's go," Tyler whispered, his voice barely audible. "Something isn't right." But before they could move, a shadow flickered in the hallway. A shadow that didn't belong to either of them. It darted past the open doorway and disappeared into the dark of the hallway. Ethan and Tyler stared at each other, frozen in place. Then they heard it, the sound of footsteps. But this time, they were coming from the living room. They slowly turned around. Ethan's pulse raced as he stepped cautiously into the living room. The lights flickered. The air felt thick, heavy with a presence that was wrong, out of place. The footsteps grew louder, louder, until they stopped. A cold gust of wind blew through the room, slamming the door shut behind them. Ethan swung around, but there was no one there. Nothing, just the empty house, now drenched in an unnatural silence. Suddenly, Tyler cried out, pointing toward the ceiling. Ethan looked up, his heart leaping into his throat. The ceiling had opened, revealing a dark, dusty crawl space that was completely unlisted on the blueprints. With trembling hands, they pried open the ceiling hatch. A thick, musty smell wafted out. Inside the crawl space, they found the remnants of children's toys, wooden blocks, a broken doll, a rusted bicycle wheel, and in the far corner, a small leather shoe still attached to a child's decayed foot. Ethan felt his legs buckle beneath him. "What the hell?" he gasped. The police were called, and forensic experts later uncovered a disturbing truth. Years before, a family had lived in the house. They had a son who mysteriously vanished during a storm, but the parents never reported it. Instead, they quietly sealed him in the crawl space, claiming that their son had disappeared into the house. They never spoke of it again. The investigators found that the boy, whose name was Nathan, had died in that crawl space. The parents, fearing they would be blamed, kept the secret locked away, hoping that the house would forget. Ethan moved out the next day. He couldn't stay there any longer. The house had always been haunted by a child's restless spirit. But it wasn't just any haunting, it was a trap. Asterisk the twist. Months later, the house was sold again. A new family moved in. They were unaware of the house's dark history. Everything seemed normal, until one night, the youngest daughter of the family came running down the stairs. "He's here," she said, her voice trembling. "The boy from upstairs. He says he wants to play." And as the storm outside raged on, the footsteps began again. Some houses don't just hold memories, they trap them. And when you move in, you don't just inherit the past, you inherit its ghosts. So the next time you hear footsteps in the dark, ask yourself, is it just the wind, or something worse? Something that wants to stay? Lena and her husband Mark had just moved into a small but cozy house in the suburbs, a fresh start after years of city living. The house was quaint, with its white picket fence, flower beds in bloom, and an inviting porch that seemed to promise peace and solitude. The couple was excited, but also a little nervous about the quiet life ahead. No more city noise, no more late-night parties, just the sound of birds in the morning and the wind rustling through the trees. It was an ordinary evening when the strange events began. Mark had just gotten back from work, and Lena was setting up the living room for their first night in the house. She plopped down on the couch, remote in hand, ready to relax. The TV, an old model they had brought with them, was silent. She hit the power button and waited for the screen to flicker to life, but it didn't. Instead, the screen remained black. Lena sighed. She got up and walked over to the TV, adjusting the cord to make sure it was plugged in. Just as she was about to sit back down, the screen flickered to life, but it wasn't showing anything she expected. On the screen was a blurry image of their living room, as though it was filmed by a hidden camera. The angle was slightly off, as though someone had placed a camera in the corner of the room. The lighting was dim, just like the room, but it was unmistakably their living room, down to the couch, the paintings on the wall, and the bookshelves. Her heart skipped a beat. She grabbed the remote and quickly turned off the TV, trying to brush off the eerie feeling that was starting to creep over her. "Must be some glitch," she muttered to herself. But as soon as she sat back down on the couch, the TV turned on again. This time it was showing their hallway, directly outside the living room, but with the same eerie, distorted quality to the image. Lena could hear the faint sound of static, like someone was trying to speak through the interference. Then a low voice, almost a whisper, came through the speakers. "Lena!" Her breath caught in her throat, her skin crawling. She stood up again and approached the TV, but before she could touch it, the image flickered again. And this time, the hallway on the screen was completely dark, except for a figure standing at the far end. It was hard to make out any details, but the silhouette seemed to be watching her, unmoving. Lena's heart raced. She stepped back, her hands shaking. There was no way someone could be in the house. She was sure she and Mark had locked up properly before settling down. "Mark!" she shouted, rushing into the kitchen where her husband was making dinner. "Mark, come here. Something's wrong with the TV." Mark came into the living room, wiping his hands on a dish towel. He looked at the screen, his face puzzled. He checked the remote and tried turning the TV off, but nothing worked. He pulled the plug from the wall, but the TV stayed on. "Okay, this is weird," Mark said, his voice tinged with concern. He knelt down and tried to pull the TV apart to see if there was a short circuit. But before he could touch it, the image on the screen changed again. This time it was showing their bedroom. Lena's stomach sank. The angle was from the doorway, showing their bed. Everything was normal. But something felt wrong. The footage seemed too precise, too focused. She turned to Mark, her voice barely a whisper. "That's where we sleep, but no one's in there." Mark frowned. "It's just a glitch, Lena. I'll unplug it properly and..." Suddenly the voice on the screen came again, louder now, clearer. "Lena!" This time the figure in the bedroom moved. It slowly turned, its features still indistinguishable, but the movement was unmistakable. It was like the figure knew they were watching. It reached out toward the camera, stretching its arms as though trying to break through the screen, and then the screen flickered again. They were back in the living room. The figure was now standing at the far end of the room, right where the hallway began. Lena and Mark froze. It was almost as if the figure knew where they were at all times. Mark felt a cold sweat trickle down his spine. "What the hell is this, Lena?" Before she could answer, the TV flickered once more, and the voice came through again, this time louder and almost commanding. "I'm already here." The sound of the voice seemed to echo through the entire house. Lena's hands trembled. There was no way they were hearing this. This wasn't some random interference. This was something else, something alive, something that had access to their home. Suddenly, the living room lights flickered, casting long, eerie shadows across the walls. Then the TV screen turned off completely. Silence. Total silence. Lena and Mark stood motionless, staring at the black screen. Then there was a soft knock at the door. Mark's heart pounded. He slowly walked toward the door, glancing nervously at Lena, who had her eyes glued to the screen. With a shaky breath, he turned the handle and opened the door, only to find nothing. But there, on the welcome mat, was a small, dirty television remote, one that looked exactly like theirs. Lena picked it up, confused. She glanced over at Mark, and without saying a word, she stepped back inside, her pulse racing. But when she looked at the TV, something had changed. The screen now showed their front porch, but it was no longer empty. A figure was standing there, staring straight into the camera. It was a twisted, distorted version of Lena, standing motionless on the porch, her face pale, eyes wide, and mouth slightly open, as though frozen in a silent scream. Mark turned pale, dropping the remote. Then Lena heard it. A soft voice, not from the TV, but from behind her. "You invited me in." When your technology starts talking back, it's no longer just a machine, it's a doorway. And once it opens, there's no shutting it again. So next time your TV flickers, remember, you might not be the one watching. Jenna and her husband Tom had just moved into their new home, a charming old house at the edge of town. It was a bit dated but full of character, with creaky wooden floors, high ceilings, and a rich history that seemed to hang in the air. The house had been abandoned for years before they bought it, and the locals always spoke of it with a mix of curiosity and caution. There was one part of the house that always felt off. In the basement, tucked away behind a dusty stack of boxes, was a door. It wasn't just any door, though. It was an old wooden door with brass hinges that had clearly seen better days. What made it strange was that it had been locked, the key nowhere to be found. Jenna had never paid much attention to it, thinking it was just a forgotten part of the house. But there was one thing that always lingered in her mind. The door had never been opened. One evening, after spending the day unpacking, Jenna found herself walking down to the basement to grab something from the old chest her grandmother had given her. The house felt oddly silent, the kind of quiet that pressed against her ears. She flicked the light switch at the top of the stairs, and the harsh yellow light flickered on, casting long shadows along the basement floor. She made her way down the stairs, her boots clicking softly against the old wood. As she passed the locked door, she couldn't help but glance at it. She had never really given it much thought before, but tonight something felt different. It was as though the door was calling her. There was a subtle pull, an almost imperceptible weight in the air that made her stop in front of it. She reached out and touched the cold, splintered wood. It felt strange. A coldness radiated from it, even colder than the rest of the basement. Suddenly, there was a sound, a soft, almost inaudible click. Jenna's hand recoiled from the door as if burned. Her breath caught in her throat. The lock had just turned. She stood frozen for a moment, unsure if what she had just heard was real. But then, before she could process it, the door creaked open by itself, swinging wide as though pushed by an unseen hand. Jenna's pulse quickened. The door had been locked for as long as she could remember, and now it was open. But the most unsettling part was that beyond the door, there was something new. It wasn't the dusty, forgotten space she had imagined. There was a staircase leading down into pitch-black darkness. The stairs looked ancient, covered in dust, and some of the wooden steps were warped, as if they hadn't been used in decades, maybe even longer. A cold draft wafted from below, carrying with it a faint, unpleasant scent. It wasn't just the smell of dust and mildew. It smelled wrong, like something rotten had been trapped down there for years. She felt a sudden urge to turn away, to retreat back upstairs and lock the door again. But something kept her rooted to the spot. Curiosity. She couldn't fight it. Her hand trembled as she reached for the banister, the wood cold to the touch, and with a deep breath, she took the first step down into the darkness. Each step echoed in the silence as she descended further. The stairs creaked beneath her weight, protesting with every move. The deeper she went, the colder it became, until it felt like the temperature had dropped by several degrees. It was almost as though she was descending into the depths of the earth. Jenna reached the bottom of the stairs, and it was so dark that she couldn't see a thing. She fumbled for her phone in her pocket, quickly turning on the flashlight. The beam illuminated a long hallway that stretched further than she could see. The walls were damp, with streaks of dark mold creeping up from the floor. She felt a chill at the back of her neck, and the hair on her arms stood on end. The air was thick, stifling, and as she stepped forward, the flashlight flickered twice before returning to its steady glow. "Hello?" she called, her voice shaking slightly. Her words bounced off the walls and were swallowed by the oppressive silence. There was no response, but the sense that someone was watching her was growing stronger with every passing second. She moved further down the hallway, the beam of light shaking in her hand. At the end of the corridor, there was another door. This one, unlike the locked basement door, was slightly ajar, as though it had been waiting for her. Jenna felt a strange magnetic pull toward it. She couldn't explain it, but she had to open it. She stepped toward it, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind screaming for her to turn back, but her body moved forward, driven by some unseen force. As she pushed the door open, her flashlight illuminated what lay beyond, a room. But not just any room. It looked like an old nursery, with toys scattered across the floor and a single dusty crib sitting against the far wall. The air was stale, thick with the scent of decay. But what caught her attention the most was the mirror on the wall opposite the crib. It was old, framed in ornate wood, and cracked across the center, the glass reflecting nothing but darkness. Jenna's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't explain why, but the sight of the mirror made her feel sick. Suddenly, she heard a noise behind her. The basement door slammed shut with a deafening bang. She spun around, her breath catching in her throat. The door to the nursery was now closed, and the room was suddenly colder. So much colder. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and her flashlight flickered again. The reflection in the mirror shifted. Jenna gasped. The reflection wasn't just of her standing in front of the mirror. It was someone else. A pale, gaunt figure with hollow eyes standing just behind her, its mouth twisted into a grotesque smile. Before she could react, a voice, deep and raspy, filled the room. "You weren't supposed to come down here." The figure in the mirror reached out toward her, and everything went black. The next morning, when Tom found her, Jenna was lying unconscious at the bottom of the stairs. The basement door was wide open, but the stairs leading down were now gone, completely vanished. It wasn't just that the stairs had disappeared, the whole basement felt different, as if it had never been there at all. The house felt colder now, emptier, like something vital had been taken from it. Jenna woke up with a start, her heart racing, but she couldn't remember how she'd gotten there. What she did remember, though, was that pale figure in the mirror and the voice that whispered, "You weren't supposed to come down here." Her mind raced with the thought, what if she had been invited? When doors open that are meant to stay locked, they can reveal more than just hidden rooms. They can reveal dark forces that were always waiting for someone to enter. So the next time you hear a door creak open by itself, remember, some things are better left undisturbed. What if you received a voicemail from yourself, screaming in terror? A voicemail you never remembered leaving. In today's story, we explore a chilling experience that will make you question the very nature of reality. Stay tuned, because this isn't just a prank. This is something far more sinister. Kara had always been an independent person, content with her quiet life. She worked at a small graphic design agency in the city, lived alone in a cozy apartment, and had a small but close-knit circle of friends. Life was simple, uneventful. Until one day, when her phone buzzed with an unknown number flashing on the screen. It was late, the clock reading well past midnight. Kara had been up working on a project, her apartment lit only by the glow of her computer screen. She frowned at the unfamiliar number, then shrugged. It was probably just another telemarketer. She let the call go to voicemail. The message left was unlike anything she expected. The voicemail began with a long, drawn-out scream. Her scream. Kara's heart raced as she listened to the distorted, blood-curdling sound, the kind of scream you might make in your worst nightmares. She froze, unable to move, as the scream echoed in her ears. Then, the voicemail cut to static, before a familiar voice came through. Her own voice pleading, "Please, Kara, you have to stop it. It's here. It's coming for you." The message ended abruptly, cutting off with a sharp electronic screech. What if you received a voicemail from yourself, screaming in terror? A voicemail you never remembered leaving. In today's story, we explore a chilling experience that will make you question the very nature of reality. Stay tuned, because this isn't just a prank. This is something far more sinister. Kara had always been an independent person, content with her quiet life. She worked at a small graphic design agency in the city, lived alone in a cozy apartment, and had a small but close-knit circle of friends. Life was simple, uneventful. Until one day, when her phone buzzed with an unknown number flashing on the screen. It was late, the clock reading well past midnight. Kara had been up working on a project, her apartment lit only by the glow of her computer screen. She frowned at the unfamiliar number, then shrugged. It was probably just another telemarketer. She let the call go to voicemail. The message left was unlike anything she expected. The voicemail began with a long, drawn-out scream. Her scream. Kara's heart raced as she listened to the distorted, blood-curdling sound, the kind of scream you might make in your worst nightmares. She froze, unable to move, as the scream echoed in her ears. Then, the voicemail cut to static, before a familiar voice came through. Her own voice pleading, "Please, Kara, you have to stop it. It's here. It's coming for you." The message ended abruptly, cutting off with a sharp electronic screech. The bed, peering into the dark hallway outside her apartment door, but found nothing. Nothing but the oppressive silence that seemed to weigh heavier with every second. She turned back to her phone and checked the call log again, just to be sure, but there was nothing new, nothing that could explain the messages. As the hours passed, Kara tried to shake off the feeling, but it lingered, the feeling of being watched. She couldn't focus on her work. She couldn't even sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her own reflection in the dark. Every time she turned her back on the phone, she could swear she heard her own voice, whispering to her from just out of sight. The next morning, things only got worse. Kara had barely slept, tossing and turning all night. But when she finally managed to drag herself out of bed, she saw another voicemail on her phone. This one was different. This time, it wasn't just her voice. The message started with a heavy breath, followed by a muffled sound of something scraping across the floor. And then she heard a voice, a deep, guttural voice, one that wasn't hers. The voice was low and menacing. "She can hear me now, can't she? It's only a matter of time before she becomes one of us." The phone went silent for a long moment before her own voice came through again, whispering, almost pleading, "It knows. It knows everything. It's not you anymore. It's me. It's me." Kara's pulse thundered in her ears. Her head spun and she dropped the phone in shock, the weight of the words crashing down on her. She had to figure out what was happening. She had to make it stop, but who or what was leaving these messages? And how was it able to mimic her voice so perfectly? Desperate for answers, Kara decided to track the calls. She reached out to her phone provider, hoping for some kind of explanation. The customer service representative was polite, but his response only made things worse. "We've never seen anything like this before, miss. The calls are coming from your own device. It's like someone else is in control of your phone, or perhaps your voice is being manipulated somehow." "But how?" Kara asked, her voice trembling. "I'm afraid I don't have an answer, ma'am," the representative replied. "You may want to consider changing your number." But it was already too late. That night, Kara woke up to a noise, faint at first but growing louder. She strained her ears, trying to place it. It was a voice, low and raspy, her own voice, "Come find me." It echoed through her apartment like a whisper in the wind, chilling and haunting. Kara's heart raced, and she rushed to her phone, only to find that there was a new voicemail. This time, there was no static, no distortion, just a clear, sharp whisper, "I'm right behind you." She spun around, and standing in the doorway was her own reflection, wearing her terrified expression. Kara opened her mouth to scream, but nothing came out. Her reflection did. Sometimes the scariest thing isn't hearing something that isn't there. It's realizing that what's in the voicemail is already happening, right in front of you. Maybe there's more to this world than we'll ever understand. And maybe it's already watching. What if you saw a figure staring at you from your window every night, and no matter how much you tried to look away, you couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching you? In today's story, we'll dive into a nightmare that will make you question everything around you. Stay tuned, because this man isn't just watching from the window, he's watching you. Samantha had never been the superstitious type. She'd always been practical, grounded, and skeptical of anything that seemed supernatural or unexplainable. But all of that changed the night she first saw him. It started innocently enough. She had just moved into a quaint little house on the edge of town, a peaceful place, away from the hustle and bustle of city life. The house was small, nestled among trees, with a lovely backyard that looked out onto a dense forest. It was quiet, tranquil, everything Samantha had wanted in her new home. But on the second night after moving in, something caught her attention. At exactly 11:59 p.m., as she was sitting in her living room, she noticed a figure standing outside her backyard window. It was barely visible at first, just a dark silhouette against the dim glow of the porch light. But as she squinted, she saw the outline of a man, tall, thin, wearing a dark coat, his face obscured by the shadows. She assumed it was just a passerby, or perhaps a neighbor out for a late-night walk. Maybe it was someone lost, trying to find their way. But then she noticed something strange. The man wasn't moving. He was standing completely still. Samantha shook her head, dismissing it as a trick of the light or her imagination. "It's nothing," she muttered to herself, turning back to her book. But when the clock struck midnight, her curiosity got the better of her. She peeked through the curtains again, and there he was, still standing in the exact same spot. Not a single movement. His hands were at his sides, his head tilted slightly downward, his body rigid as though frozen in place. For a moment, Samantha felt a chill run down her spine. She quickly closed the curtains, trying to calm herself. Maybe it was a weird coincidence, she thought. Perhaps it was just a shadow, or someone who didn't realize they were standing there for so long. But every night after that, it happened. At the exact same time, 11:59 p.m. sharp, he would appear, standing motionless in her backyard window. No matter how many times Samantha tried to ignore it, the eerie presence of the man haunted her. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing night, the figure never wavered. He would be there at the same time, in the same spot, never blinking, never moving an inch. Samantha found herself growing more and more uneasy, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. There was something unsettling about the way he stood there, unblinking, his dark eyes fixed on the house as though he was waiting for something. Samantha told herself it was probably just a neighbor, some eccentric individual with bad habits. But she couldn't deny the dread creeping over her each time the clock neared midnight. One evening, as the air grew colder and the wind howled outside, Samantha gathered the courage to confront the figure. She told herself she had to know what was going on. Maybe there was an explanation after all. Maybe it was some sort of trick or prank. As the clock struck 11:59, she stood up, her heart pounding in her chest. With trembling hands, she opened the back door and stepped out into the yard. The air was damp and thick with the scent of pine. She walked slowly toward the window where the man always stood, determined to get a closer look. But when she reached the spot, the figure was gone. Relief washed over her for a brief moment. She let out a sigh and turned back toward the house. But then she heard a soft creaking sound behind her. She whipped around. The man was standing at the other side of the window now, even closer than before. The shock nearly knocked the breath out of her. How had he gotten there so quickly? How had he crossed the yard without a sound? She froze, her pulse racing. Her eyes locked on the man, whose face was now more visible than ever. He wasn't just standing, he was now staring at her, his eyes wide and unblinking, his expression vacant and empty. He didn't smile, he didn't speak. He just stood there, motionless, his presence suffocating her. Samantha backed away slowly, her feet stumbling over the uneven ground. She ran into the house, slamming the door behind her. Her mind raced. What was going on? Who was this man? And why was he always there? That night, she didn't sleep. She couldn't. The thought of the man, standing, watching, waiting, haunted her. She tried to call the police, but when they arrived, they found nothing. The backyard was empty, the window shut tight. No signs of anyone having been there at all. The next night, the same thing happened. At 11:59 p.m., the man appeared in the window again, but this time something was different. This time, he wasn't alone. There were more figures, more shadowy shapes, emerging from the darkness of the yard. Samantha could barely breathe as she stared at the scene unfolding before her. There were at least 4 or 5 figures now, standing still, staring at her house. Their faces were obscured, but she could feel their eyes, all of their eyes on her. Her. In a panic, Samantha grabbed her phone, but when she looked back to the window, they were gone. Not just gone, but as if they had never been there. Samantha didn't know what to do. She couldn't stay in the house anymore, but as she began packing her things, she realized something truly terrifying. The man wasn't just watching from the window anymore. He had followed her inside. There was no escape from the window. Sometimes the most terrifying thing isn't what you see. It's the thing you can't escape. What happens when the one thing that's watching you comes into your home? What if he's already inside, waiting? Think about it. The next time you hear a creak in the house, maybe, just maybe, someone's waiting for you in the window. Have you ever heard a noise that you couldn't explain? Something scraping, scratching, just beyond your reach? In today's story, we'll dive into a nightmare where the very walls of a house seem alive with something far darker than anyone could imagine. Stay tuned to find out what's hidden within. It was supposed to be a fresh start. Kelly and her husband Mark had just moved into an old farmhouse on the edge of town. The house was quaint, charming even, with creaky wooden floors, a fireplace that seemed to always smell like burning wood, and a history that gave it a character all its own. Kelly loved it from the moment they first stepped inside, but it wasn't long before she started noticing the strange noises. At first it was subtle, just a soft, barely audible scratching coming from behind the walls. Kelly thought it might be the house settling, or perhaps a squirrel trapped in the attic. She brushed it off. After all, it was an old house, and old houses made strange noises. Mark, ever the skeptic, reassured her, saying that it was probably just the pipes or the wind playing tricks on her. But as the nights passed, the noises grew louder. Every night, just as she was about to fall asleep, the scratching would begin. It started as a faint tap, like fingernails tapping against wood. But as days turned into weeks, the sound grew in intensity. It was no longer just tapping. It became an unmistakable scratching, scraping, scurrying sound. Something, or someone, was moving behind the walls, scraping against the wooden beams with such force that it shook the plaster. At first, Kelly tried to ignore it. She convinced herself it was just her imagination, or the house's old plumbing, but the noises kept getting worse, more frantic. There were nights when it sounded like something was clawing its way up from the basement, dragging itself through the walls like a beast in the dark. Mark, however, remained unfazed. He told Kelly that it was probably a rat or some other animal stuck in the walls, and that it would get out eventually. He said he would look into it, but his busy work schedule kept him away from home for long stretches of time. One night, the noise was louder than ever before. Kelly lay in bed, her sheets tangled around her legs as she tried to ignore the relentless scratching. But it was impossible. The sound was so close, so real. It felt like something was right outside her bedroom door. She held her breath and listened, trying to pinpoint where the noise was coming from. It wasn't just the walls anymore. It was in the floorboards. It was in the ceiling. The house felt alive, as though it was filled with something. Watching, something waiting. The scratching was followed by low growls, almost imperceptible, but enough to make her heart race. Was it the wind? Or was something truly inside the house? Kelly couldn't take it anymore. She decided to confront it. The next morning, she waited until Mark left for work, then grabbed a flashlight and headed into the basement, determined to find the source of the noise once and for all. She carefully pulled aside a loose panel near the old stone wall and shone the light into the narrow crawl space. At first, she saw nothing but dirt and old cobwebs. But as she peered deeper into the shadows, her flashlight landed on something strange. There were scratches, deep gouging scratches, on the walls of the crawl space. And then she saw something that made her blood run cold. Small, human-like handprints smeared along the damp stone. Her breath caught in her throat. Was someone trapped down there? Was it the work of animals or something else? Suddenly she heard it again, the unmistakable sound of scratching. But this time, it wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from inside the crawl space, just beyond her reach. The scratching was followed by a raspy breath, a sound that didn't belong to any animal. A chill ran through her body, but she didn't move. Her feet felt frozen to the floor as she tried to comprehend what she was hearing. Whatever was in there was alive, and it was aware of her presence. Kelly stumbled backward, the flashlight slipping from her hand as she scrambled to her feet. The house seemed to groan and creak as if it were alive with something dark, something old. She bolted up the stairs, heart pounding in her chest, and locked the door behind her. She didn't know what she had just heard, but one thing was certain. Something was trapped inside the walls of that house, and it was trying to get out. That night, Mark was late coming home. Kelly couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with thoughts of what she had discovered in the basement. Her eyes kept darting to the walls, waiting for the scratching to begin again. And then, just after midnight, it started. The scratching was louder than ever before, almost deafening. It sounded like claws on wood. But this time, it wasn't just in one part of the house. The sound was all around her. It was everywhere. The walls, the ceiling, the floor. All of them were alive with the noise, as if something was moving behind every surface. Kelly jumped out of bed, heart in her throat, and ran into the hallway. The scratching grew louder, now accompanied by a low, gurgling hiss. She didn't dare look behind her as she raced down the stairs, but when she reached the living room, she froze. The scratching had stopped. There was silence. But then, from the corner of the room, she saw it, the dark shape, tall and gaunt, almost human, with long arms and elongated fingers. It emerged from the shadows. Its eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the dim light from the fireplace. It was standing in the middle of the room. It had been there all along, hidden within the walls of the house, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Kelly opened her mouth to scream, but before she could make a sound, the figure lunged at her. Mark arrived home just in time to see Kelly disappear into the darkness. The house was eerily still, and the scratching had ceased completely. When he tried to call her name, there was no response. It was as if the house had swallowed her whole. He searched the house, but Kelly was gone. The walls were silent now, as though nothing had ever happened. The scratching had stopped, but it wasn't over, and in the silence of that night, the walls whispered of something far worse. Some houses don't just hold memories, they keep secrets. And sometimes the most terrifying thing you'll ever find in a house isn't in the attic or the basement, but hidden deep within the very walls themselves. What's waiting for you behind them might be something you'll never escape. Have you ever had something disappear from right in front of you, only to have it show up in the most unexpected place? In today's story, we follow a terrifying mystery where nothing stays where it belongs, and the truth behind it will chill you to your core. Stay tuned. It started small, just a pair of keys missing from the kitchen counter one morning. Hannah thought she must have misplaced them in her rush to leave for work. She searched the house, checked her bag, and moved on with her day. But when she returned home that night, the keys were back, sitting innocently on the counter, as if nothing had happened. At first, she chalked it up to forgetfulness. She had been under a lot of stress at work recently, after all, but the strange occurrences didn't stop there. Over the next few days, more objects began to disappear. Her favorite coffee mug was gone one morning, only to reappear on the mantel hours later. Her shoes, placed neatly by the door, vanished and turned up under the couch. A book she had been reading, left on the kitchen table, was suddenly missing, only to be found in the bathroom sink the next day. It wasn't just the little things anymore. Hannah was beginning to lose track of her larger belongings too. The remote control, her purse, even her phone. They all seemed to move around the house, reappearing in odd places, as if they were trying to tell her something. But what? It was becoming increasingly unsettling, and Hannah felt her grip on reality start to slip. She'd check the kitchen, only to find her keys on the far side of the room. She'd leave her purse on the couch, but when she came back, it would be under the coffee table. The items would always return, but not where they should be. One afternoon, after an entire day of searching for her missing items, she found herself standing in the hallway, staring at the front door, which was slightly ajar. She could have sworn she had locked it that morning, but now it was open. And in the doorway, lying on the welcome mat, was something that had never been there before, an old tattered diary. The leather cover was cracked and worn, the pages yellow with age. The moment her fingers touched it, she felt a jolt of energy, as if the book was pulling her in. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, but curiosity overtook her. She had to know. She opened the book, and the first page was filled with a neat, old-fashioned handwriting. The words, though faded, were still legible. This house has many secrets. They move as we do, shifting with the time. Never trust the place where your belongings disappear. It is watching, and it will take you too. Hannah's heart raced. Who wrote this? She didn't recognize the handwriting. She flipped through the pages, each one more unsettling than the last. Descriptions of objects vanishing. Keys, books, glasses, just like hers. But as she read on, the entries grew darker, more cryptic. The house itself is alive. It consumes, it hides, and it takes what it wants. You will never know what is real again. The entry stopped abruptly, leaving the final page blank. Hannah slammed the book shut, her hands trembling. Her mind raced, and she couldn't shake the eerie feeling that something was very wrong with her home. That night, as she lay in bed, she heard the familiar sound of objects shifting, moving around in the house. It was the same as always, keys rattling, books falling, the quiet shuffle of something being dragged across the floor. But now it felt different. It was louder, closer, and it wasn't stopping. Hannah pulled the covers over her head, trying to block out the noise. She had to ignore it. She couldn't let it consume her, but when she finally worked up the courage to check, she froze. There, standing at the foot of her bed, was her purse. But it wasn't just sitting there. It was moving. The straps were twitching, as though something inside was shifting, as though the bag was breathing. Her pulse spiked. The hairs on her neck prickled, and a cold sweat broke out across her skin. She had to get out of there. But as she stood to leave, the purse suddenly lurched forward and fell onto the floor with a thud. The room grew ice cold. The lights flickered, and then went out completely, plunging her into darkness. Hannah reached for her phone. But it was gone, vanished just like everything else. Panic set in. Then, from the darkness came a sound she'd heard far too many times before. A slow, deliberate scratch, like fingernails dragging against the floor. She froze, straining to hear it more clearly. It wasn't coming from the walls anymore. It was coming from inside her. A whisper, soft but unmistakable, slithered into her ears. "You shouldn't have found it." Hannah's blood ran cold. She turned around, her breath shallow, her body rigid with terror. Standing in the doorway was a figure, tall and shadowed, with hollow eyes that seemed to stare straight through her. It was wearing her missing clothes, her shirt, her shoes, everything. It was her, but it wasn't. Her own reflection, twisted and wrong. The thing moved toward her, and as it did, the house seemed to come alive, its walls closing in, suffocating her. The noises, scratching, shifting, grew louder, blending into a cacophony of chaos. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't escape. The figure raised its hand, and as it did, everything around Hannah seemed to vanish. The next morning, when Mark returned home, everything was in its place, except for Hannah. Her purse, her keys, her belongings were all accounted for, but she was gone. As Mark searched the house, he found the old diary, tucked away in the hallway. He flipped it open, his hands trembling as he read the final page. It's too late. She is part of the house now. It took her, just as it takes everyone. The pages were stained with something dark, something that wasn't ink, and the final words on the page seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. Some houses hold more than memories. They hold something far darker, something that feeds on what you hold dear. And when you lose track of what's real, it might just be the house that's taking everything from you. It's still watching you. Imagine coming home to find muddy footprints leading through your house, only to realize that someone has used a key to enter, one that only you should have. In today's terrifying story, we explore the mystery behind a key that doesn't belong, and the strange events that follow. Keep watching, if you dare. Lena had always felt safe in her home. After years of living in a quiet suburban neighborhood, her house was her sanctuary, a place where nothing could disturb her peace. She had taken all the necessary precautions, locks on every door, security cameras in every corner, and even a deadbolt that made her feel secure when she was alone at night. But that sense of security shattered one cold evening in late fall. She'd returned home from work, weary from the long hours of meetings and paperwork. The weather had turned stormy, with sheets of rain pounding against her windows as she walked up to her front door. She pulled out her keys and unlocked the door, stepping inside with a sigh of relief. It had been a long day, and all she wanted was to curl up on the couch with a book and forget the stresses of the world. But something was off. At first, she didn't notice. She took off her coat, hung it in the closet, and kicked off her shoes, unaware of the faint sound of wet footsteps on the hardwood floor. It wasn't until she stepped into the kitchen that she saw it, the trail of muddy footprints, leading from the back door, past the living room, and up toward the staircase. She froze, her heart skipping a beat. Her first thought was that she had left the door unlocked by mistake. Maybe a neighbor or a delivery person had entered, or perhaps her friend Rachel had stopped by to check on her. But then she remembered something unsettling. Her back door had been locked when she arrived home. She hadn't left it open. The footprints led up to the stairs, growing fainter with each step. But Lena could see that the person who had made them had walked all the way to the second floor. Her pulse quickened. No one should have been here. especially not with the door locked. She had checked it that morning. As she crept up the stairs, a chill ran through her. The house felt colder now, more oppressive. She reached the top of the stairs and walked down the hallway, every step feeling like it echoed too loudly in the silence. The footprints continued, muddy and wet, leading to her bedroom door. Lena's breath hitched in her throat. Her mind raced. Had someone broken in? How had they gotten inside? Her hand trembled as she reached for the door handle, but before she could turn it, she noticed something that made her stomach drop. The lock. It was unlocked. Panic bubbled up inside her chest, but she couldn't stop herself from slowly opening the door. She stepped inside, the faint smell of damp earth filling her nostrils. Her eyes darted around the room, but it looked exactly as it had when she left that morning. Nothing appeared to be out of place, except for one thing. On her dresser, next to her wallet, sat a key. It wasn't just any key. It was her spare key, the one she kept hidden in a drawer for emergencies. She never used it, never needed to. It had been tucked away in its usual spot when she left this morning. But now it was out, sitting there, like it had been waiting for her. Lena's mind raced. How could this be? Only she knew about the spare key. Only she had ever touched it. With trembling hands, she reached for the key. It was cold, unnervingly so. She held it in her hand, her mind reeling. The door had been locked. The spare key was still in its drawer when she left. So how did someone else have it? And why would they leave it on her dresser? As she stood there, trying to process the terrifying thought that someone else had a duplicate of her key, she heard a faint sound, footsteps. The sound was coming from downstairs. Lena's heart pounded in her chest. There was no way. The house was empty. She was sure of it. Yet the footsteps continued, slow and deliberate, moving across the floor, closer to the stairs. Her thoughts were a blur as she rushed to the bedroom window, looking out into the rain-soaked yard. She saw nothing but darkness and shadows, the streetlights barely illuminating the pouring rain. Her eyes quickly scanned the front of the house, but no one was outside. The footsteps continued. Lena made a decision. She couldn't stay in the house any longer. She grabbed her phone, dialed 911, and ran to the back door, which was still locked. There was no sign of a break-in, no forced entry. And yet, there was a sense of presence, something watching her from the shadows. The operator on the other end of the line picked up just as she rushed toward the door. 911, what's your emergency? There's someone in my house, Lena whispered, barely able to speak. I think they have a key that shouldn't exist. She was about to tell them more, but before the operator could respond, the door handle jiggled. The door, locked just moments ago, slowly creaked open by itself. Lena's breath caught in her throat. She stepped back, her back against the wall, as the sound of wet footsteps grew closer. A voice broke the silence. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. Soft, mocking. Lena, the voice called, a cold whisper that echoed from behind the door. It was her voice, but it was wrong. It wasn't her. The footsteps reached the threshold of the doorway, and the shadow of a figure appeared on the other side. And then the door swung open. Lena couldn't breathe. There, standing in the doorway, was herself, or something that looked exactly like her. The woman wore a twisted grin, her eyes hollow and cold, a reflection of everything Lena feared. "Who are you?" Lena choked out, but the doppelganger only smiled. The woman stepped forward, her movements jerky, unnatural. As she came closer, the duplicate Lena held out her hand. In her palm was the exact same spare key Lena had left on the dresser. "No," Lena whispered, her legs shaking as she backed away. "You're not real." But the figure stepped forward again, saying nothing, just reaching for her. And as Lena's world collapsed into fear, she realized the house had always been waiting for her. In a house where nothing is what it seems, and the key to your safety becomes the key to your downfall. How do you know who you can trust when even your reflection can betray you? Have you ever looked into a mirror, only to realize that the reflection staring back at you isn't quite the same as you? Tonight's story takes a chilling twist as a simple moment in front of the mirror becomes a terrifying encounter with something watching, waiting. Keep watching, if you dare. Catherine had always been fond of the quiet comfort of her small apartment. It was the kind of place that wrapped you in peace after a long day, warm, cozy, with soft lighting and the hum of the city outside her windows. But lately, something about her apartment had begun to feel off. It started small, just little things, items out of place, a chill in the air that lingered even when the heat was on full blast. But the moment that would change everything happened on a quiet Tuesday night when Catherine returned from work, exhausted, her mind heavy with the usual weight of responsibility. She had made herself a quick dinner, some pasta, a glass of wine, and was just about to head for a long bath when she glanced into the hallway mirror by the bathroom. She froze. For a moment, her reflection appeared slightly distorted. At first, she thought it was just the dim lighting playing tricks on her tired eyes. But the more she stared, the more it unsettled her. The reflection seemed too vivid, almost like it was watching her. Shaking her head, she dismissed the thought. Just the shadows, she muttered. You're being silly, Catherine. With a deep breath, she walked past the mirror and headed into the bathroom. As she ran the warm water, the thought of the strange reflection nagged at her. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Maybe it was just the stress of her job, or the quiet isolation that had been creeping in. But the apartment just didn't feel like her home anymore. As she stepped into the bath, the warm water enveloped her body, and she let out a sigh of relief, trying to let go of the anxiety gnawing at her mind. But as the steam filled the room, something else began to fill the silence. A sound, faint, like a whisper. But it wasn't coming from anywhere. It was as though it was coming from within her own mind. The whispers stopped as abruptly as they had started. But Catherine couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She quickly finished her bath, dried off, and wrapped herself in a robe. That's when she glanced back into the hallway mirror. The reflection still looked like her, but this time, something was different. Her reflection smiled, a slow, unsettling grin that spread across its face. Catherine's blood ran cold as she watched her reflection's smile widen, the eyes gleaming with something dark. She stepped back, her heart racing, but the smile only deepened. Her reflection, her own reflection, stayed frozen in place, smiling, as though it had all the time in the world to watch her. Catherine's. Her hand shook as she reached for the light switch, flicking it off in desperation, thinking the darkness would somehow change everything. But it didn't. The reflection remained, smiling in the dark as though it had been expecting this. She couldn't tear her eyes away from it, her body frozen in place. The reflection was still, its smile a mocking echo of her own expression. What's happening? Catherine whispered to herself, her voice barely above a breath. Then, the smile moved. It wasn't a smile at all. It was something sinister. The reflection tilted its head slightly, eyes still locked on Catherine's. And then, without warning, it reached up, mirroring Catherine's own trembling movements. Catherine stumbled backward, gasping in shock. The reflection didn't stop. It stayed, mimicking her every movement. But something was wrong. She could see the details in the reflection more clearly now. Its smile was twisted, its eyes colder, darker. It was no longer her reflection at all. It was as if the reflection had come to life. "Stop!" Catherine whispered, her voice cracking as she backed away from the mirror. But the reflection didn't obey. Instead, it seemed to grow more alive with each passing second. Its movements became more erratic, more exaggerated. The smile grew wider. In that moment, Catherine realized something horrifying. The reflection wasn't mimicking her anymore. It was in control. She turned and ran down the hallway, desperate to escape the mirror's pull. But the moment she passed the mirror, she saw it again, her reflection, still smiling. But it wasn't alone. There was something else, something darker, moving behind her. It was as if the reflection had extended into the hallway itself. The real Catherine rushed into the living room, her heart pounding in her chest, her breath shallow. The apartment, once a safe haven, now felt like a maze of nightmares. She dared a glance behind her, only to find the reflection still there, watching her. No longer just confined to the mirror. It was growing, slowly seeping out of the glass, twisting, distorting into something monstrous. Her reflection's eyes locked with hers once again. And this time it spoke. "You can't escape me." The voice was hers. It sounded like her, but not. It was wrong. It carried a chilling resonance, a distorted version of her own voice. Catherine screamed and turned to run. But the moment she did, the mirror in the hallway shattered. The sound was deafening, echoing through the apartment like an explosion. But as the glass fell to the ground, Catherine realized the truth. Her reflection hadn't stayed behind. It was with her. Standing behind her now, in the dark apartment, mimicking her every movement. Without thinking, Catherine stumbled toward the door, her pulse thundering in her ears. But just as her hand reached for the doorknob, the reflection reached forward, grabbing her wrist. The touch was ice cold. "Where are you going?" it whispered. Catherine yanked her arm away, terror flooding her veins as she turned to face the creature that was once her reflection. "No, stay away from me," she screamed. But the reflection, its smile ever widening, simply tilted its head and repeated in that mocking, distorted voice, "You can't escape me." Sometimes the thing we fear most isn't the dark or the unknown, but the parts of ourselves we can never escape. In Catherine's case, her reflection found a way out. And now, it's her turn to stay inside.